Welcome to Tobi's Student Expert Podcast. On this platform, Tobi will engage with student experts, their field of study, passions and interests. My name is Tommy Poppers. My field of study is art and literature. My expertise is in comparative literature.
Hello listeners, I am your host Tobi and welcome to the 5th episode. I spoke to Tommy Poppers, a writer, musician and sometime drag artist and LGBT campaigner. And his interview will be split into 3 parts, this being the first. Our interview commenced with his love of Gothic literature of the fin de siècle. We quickly moved on to art as a form of communication and his own writing and performances inspired by his recovery from abusive relationships, assault and trauma. Art is evident as a form of catharsis for Tommy, and we discuss art as catharsis generally. We move on to art and its conflict with power, and then on to Graham Harman's metaphysical theory of Object Orientated Ontology.
One of my main interests is Gothic literature of a period called the fin de siècle, which is the turn of the century. I have a passion for those texts, things like Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, Oscar Wilde's Portrait of Dorian Gray, all of those classic Gothic horror stories in a sense. And what I found when I was reading them is they're incredibly intelligent, very perceptive meditations on what was going on in Western culture at that time. And they're very deep, dense texts. They're not very light things. Yeah. And even though they have these fantastical, magical stories around them, they're actually making very serious points about the human condition. So I've always been fascinated by the Gothic literature. And obviously Oscar Wilde is a genius at it because he just makes it funny too. You know, it's hilarious. Yeah. It's really witty, very darkly funny, which I love. He wrote a book called The Portrait of Dorian Gray. Yeah. And it's quite famous for... they've tried to make it into films, but they never really capture the wit of it. It's one of those ones you have to read.
I remember there was one kind of relatively recently with, is it Colin Firth? Possibly,
yes.
So that you've never seen an adaptation of it that lives up to the literature?
Yeah, because, I mean, that's one of the reasons I like literature so much is because it's a conversation between you and the author. Because you are directly reading the signs from one person's hand and you're interpreting them your own way, which is why people frequently say, oh, the film's not as good as the book. Well, it's not going to be. Because by the time you get to make a film, you've got 200 plus people working on a film.
Especially if it's big productions, yeah.
Yeah. Whereas when you read a book, you're reading exactly what the author thinks, and he's painting that picture in your mind. So it's a very direct, undiluted form. So obviously when you read something like The Portrait of Dorian Gray, all the levels, all the humour, all the things, I mean, that's almost impossible to catch in film. You know, film is, I love film, it's a very different medium and it has some wonderful things that it can do that books can't. You know, it can show you things. Whereas, obviously my passion is always literature, it's always been that way for me because I get much more intensely involved with the characters and the imagination of it.
Yeah.
Reading's great.
I've noticed with certain people, certain artists, that they connect very much with their literature with art. In your experience, when you've got into something like literature or performance or music, is that particular to you as well?
Yeah, I mean, I see all of these things as different aspects of the same motivation. I think we are beings that want to communicate on many different levels, and there's many different levels that we do that. There's language. There is all of the art forms really are interconnected. So, obviously literature uses language, uses metaphor. So that's one part of it. But as is music, and music does. Music has a metaphorical aspect. And poetry and dance and all these different ways of expressing and communicating. They all come from the desire to share experiences, to narrate, to talk to each other, to communicate, to make a community.
Yeah.
I think the problem with conventional academia is it atomizes those things, it splits them up. It says, no, you don't study art, you study books. Well, of course, as soon as you start to get to your undergraduate, your master's and your PhD level, you suddenly realise these things are totally interconnected. And of course, you can't study literature without having an appreciation of music. You can't study music without having an appreciation of literature. You can't study film without understanding narrative and literature. So these things are all, the crossovers are there.
Yeah. What I'm finding quite interesting is as I go in, travel along in my path of academic learning, is that there are certain things I'm taking to. I'm becoming much more interested in art and what art is and how it's connected to religious experiences, spirituality, truth. But also there are things where I appreciate that I can't academically get into, and I think I told you about when I did the review of your play.
Yeah.
It was very easy to do the review because of how I responded to it, how I interacted with it on a basic level, kind of on a visceral level. There's an oxymoron here because even though on a visceral level it speaks to me not in terms of language but in terms of an experience.
Yeah.
Even though what I wrote was incomplete, what I wrote wasn't adequately expressing it, I was still able to express something of what I engaged with.
Yeah.
Whereas there are things that I've tried to write about that even though I might know it's a good performance or whatever, or a good piece of literature, that I can't engage with it in the same way. Do you find that yourself?
Yeah, I mean, well, we meet certain things at certain times and they have relevance to us. I think, I read Charles Dickens, first of all, when I was in school for my GCSEs like everyone else, and we were beaten around the head with it and made to love it. And we hated it, and there was nothing in there. And of course, it wasn't until I was in my 30s and I went and studied as a mature student that I actually read Great Expectations again. And I realised why it was so great. Because I had those extra 20 years worth of experience,
Yeah.
So he was speaking to me then. He's not speaking to a 16-year-old kid. He's speaking to a 30-year-old man. So of course you're going to see that, And it's the same way, maybe at the moment I get it. Not everybody gets a lot of the music and the plays I write. Not everybody. But I'm not really writing for everyone. I'm writing for people who have very similar experiences to me, and that's okay. But, other people can have experiences to it too. And one lady came up to me afterwards and she went, it's a bit depressing for me. And that's her reaction. That's absolutely fine, and I'm not precious about it. That's what she got. So, okay, great. You thought it was depressing. Somebody else came up to me and cried and burst into tears and said, thank God you've said this.
Yeah.
So you have to kind of negotiate and understand that sometimes you're just not talking to everybody.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
Yeah. Would it be alright to talk about your play?
Yeah, please.
Because what you've just said there, in terms of some people not getting it and other people completely getting it.
Yeah.
It's interesting the way I've engaged with your play and other things, some LGBT art, other kind of art as well.
Yeah.
Even though I haven't had the experiences that you've had.
Yeah.
And I don't identify the way that you do as, assuming you're identified as a gay man. Or do you?
No, I'm probably asexual now. I mean, I don't have any kind of affiliations to
anybody. Right.
I completely hear what you're saying, and that's okay too. I can engage with certain things, like when I was younger, I really, really loved watching, for example, a Mad Max film. You know, but it's not particularly made for somebody like me. You know, it's made for more like you, kind of. So, but you can appreciate certain things in different ways, and that's okay. It doesn't mean to say that the only people who are going to like my play are people who've had abusive relationships or people who are LGBTQ. I mean, the majority of the audience will identify with it in that sense, but it doesn't mean to say everybody will get it. You know, I mean. But
I'm interested in that gem of connection. And where the art is in that. Can you talk about the art in terms of your music and in terms of your play and your writing?
Well, it's changed a lot because I think we change as people. I've grown a lot, so therefore the stuff I'm making now I wouldn't have made 20 years ago, and that's because
when
it's
did you
different
actually
experience.
write the play and
the album I actually wrote while I was in hospital. So it was recovering from being beaten up, really, and I had various injuries. It took about 6 months to get over. So I wrote the first songs in there, and I stopped performing, and I had no intention of ever performing again. But because I'd written the songs in there and it was very immediate and visceral, I then started to wear a mask and just go and perform them anonymously in open mic nights and little shows around in Europe and in Asia where I was travelling. And I'd never introduced myself, and I performed as a character called Mr. E. I wouldn't say anything to anyone, I would just literally turn up, wouldn't speak to anyone. I'd sing one of these songs and then just walk off again. Okay. And it was very much a cathartic process of dealing with it. It was therapy. Yeah. And I had no intention of it being what it's become. Really. Yeah. The motivation was getting better and healing. So that it was not about anybody else. It was about a personal journey. But my producer had heard me in Berlin, and then he said, look, we've got to make an album out of this. And I was really non-committal to do that, but we ended up doing it anyway. We've got fantastic musicians involved. It sounds great. It sounds completely something that I never would have imagined. And we sold enough to pay for it. And that was it. I'm not interested in promoting it and going out and doing the whole 9 yards in the music industry again, because I had such a bad experience with the music industry the first time around. So it's just kind of, it's there, I did it, and it feels very weird now when I listen to it, because it wasn't actually written for anybody else, I don't think, and to hear it, it's incredibly personal and intimate. So. But it works, I think.
So when you were writing the music in hospital, and then when you started to perform it anonymously as Mr. E, were you conscious of what you were doing?
No, because it was PTSD. I mean, looking back now, that's what it was. But I didn't really have.
That's one of your songs, isn't it?
Yeah, it's not something I would have identified at the time. I just would have thought, well, this is what I have to do. It made no sense to me. I told no one I was doing it. No one knew I was doing it.
Oh, right. So
it's not. I didn't advertise it and promote it. I just, because I'd shut myself away. I stopped talking to friends, society. I literally would go to work every day as I was beginning to heal after these things, and the songs had been written, and I wouldn't talk to anybody. I'd shut myself off from absolutely everybody, and it was my way of reconnecting to people. And even then, now it feels very alien, because it doesn't feel like who I am now, but I think it was a journey I went through to get to where I am now. I can't imagine doing it now. I think about the person I was then. I mean, I was suicidal most days. And people don't talk about those kind of things, because they just think, well, you'll get over it kind of thing. And you don't. And I reevaluated everything. I stopped drinking and all of those kind of things, because I found myself oddly. I used to be completely erratic, completely creative and lunatic and binge boozer. And then after, obviously, this profound change, I went completely the other way, where I was just not really had no contact with anybody else, no talking to anyone else. I would literally go to my work and I became OCD, the tidiness aspect, the scrubbing, the clean, everything became a ritual. And now, so I'm slowly but surely starting to come back to the middle, you know what I mean? I've kind of gone from one mad end to the other mad end, and it's slowly kind of coming back to the middle. But it's a journey.
Because I'm doing a master's, as I told you earlier, in cultural studies.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping to connect the ideas of what art is, and particularly, you probably know about it, Walter Benjamin's idea of the aura.
Yeah.
And I think that I haven't read much about it, but people call it the effect now.
Yeah.
So I'm interested in that and connecting it with ideas and concepts of truth, and also the mystical experiences, but also kind of Eastern ideas of being, so being in the moment, so Buddhist ideas of disassociating yourself with attachments, desires and stuff like that. I'm interested in those ideas of absolute truth.
Yes.
That it's not connected with language, experience. Now, what I see from your music and your play, and also your writing, I absolutely connect it with art. Recognise what I recognise as art. But what I kind of notice is there are other people that might have experienced similar things to you, maybe not exactly the same, but have gone through some kind of trauma, and also addiction, alcoholism, and that have gone through a process of transformation in terms of their, in terms of recovering from trauma, illness, and back to recovery, back to normalcy, I suppose.
Or some kind of balance.
Yeah. So, how closely do you think art and these experiences are connected?
I think that's a very interesting question, because I think it gets to the nature of art. I mean, is art purely catharsis, or is it more something more aesthetic? And I always, come very much from the idea that there is an element of catharsis in there. But then again, it doesn't have to be all about that. I certainly don't give any kind of authenticity or legitimacy to just art being one particular thing. It can be many things. I found that it was a very useful tool to get over a traumatic experience, but then that actually, once I'd started to work on that and practice it and to fine-tune it, it became something else, and so it became relevant on many different levels to many other different people. So it's not just about me, then it becomes about other people, and they can get from it what they like. And I think that's the difference. I think of something that's quite good art. It doesn't just speak of one person's experience or to an individual. It might sort of speak to a much more general and more broader feeling.
Well, I noticed at the end of the play, I can't remember the exact words, but you were talking about, when you're thanking the audience, you were talking, everyone's got a story.
Yes.
And they need to be told.
Yes.
Can you talk a bit about that, what you meant by that, and what the intention was?
Yeah, I mean, because I do think that whether you do it within your relationship, which is, if you think about what a relationship is, what a friendship is, what a community is, on all of these levels, it's built on telling stories, narrating, telling little stories about each other. And I think these are the things that need to be told within a particular community or relationship, or
Yeah.
and many times you see in society, I just think we shut stories out because we don't like to hear them and we're not engaging with them.
Absolutely.
And that doesn't help. And now I don't mean to say everyone needs to run away and go and write, an album about their life. They don't have to.
Yeah.
But having, what I meant by narrating and telling their story is to be able to be open to sharing these stories to people in their life, whether it's friends, whether it's family, whether it's a relationship. And once you just have that connection with someone else and you're telling that story to someone, then that's what needs to be heard. And I think one of the reasons I've always been involved in Pride, even though, like I said, I don't really have a sexuality anymore. I mean, that was kind of removed from me for many reasons. But I think I identify with that, and I think it's so clear because I think that gives people something to kind of focus on and just go, right, things don't have to be the way they are, and we can talk about these different things, and we can have a space where that's okay, and why I think that's important. I donate as much my voluntary time as I can to making a Pride event in any local community I've ever been.
Yeah.
Because I think it's still a huge taboo, it's still a huge problem, and I just think if we can get past our problems with talking about these things, we make things a lot easier all around, Maybe I live in some sort of weird utopian world.
So you connect art with community, stories, and cohesion. I'm reminded of this book I read, if you can respond to it, if you're able to respond to it. So this book is an ancient Chinese text, and it's called the Book of Lord Shang.
Okay.
And the Book of Lord Shang, there's something called ancient legalism. Within this book, this legal text, it's very bureaucratic and very kind of fixed the structure of what China was back then. And basically, people were either forced to be soldiers or farmers, and the old and infirm weren't taken care of, and they diminished art and culture and community, and everything was geared up to run the state, run the emperor. Can you respond to that?
I think...
I know it's slightly kind of not specifically about art, but I think there are issues there that are quite relevant today as well.
I think many, when you start to organise any society from many different communities, I always think that you tend to lose an awful lot of authenticity. And one of the first things to go is communication and compatibility. And understanding and empathy and all of these things get kind of swept away. And that goes from any culture or any society, perhaps. I mean, I feel much more comfortable living in China or in Southeast Asia, in Asian cultures, as an outsider. For me, it works better. I can understand, for many people who are born into that culture, they don't have the same experiences. But they do have a very strong Confucian sense of family being one of the forming institutions. So, more so than the state. So, I mean, you owe allegiance to your family much more than you do to the state. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
And I like kind of those smaller kind of tribal units within this big thing. So, of course, so many things are illegal in China. Nobody cares. You know what I mean? It's like people are just like, oh, is it illegal? As long as you don't kind of upset a richer family, you're kind of all right. And it's this weird, there is this legal framework, but everyone knows it's just kind of a guideline. Whereas we tend to, I think in the West, we put much more faith and store in a sort of legalized societal framework, which, isn't real, and I think we're in a bit of denial here. I don't know. I find it very strange coming back to the West. I don't like being in the UK. I hate it because of just so much history I have here. I find it very weird wherever I go in the UK. One of the reasons I ended up in Margate was to try and start again, to feel like somewhere I'd never been before. So it felt like somewhere new. But I have a huge problem with being back here culturally, or it doesn't fit me or the way I see the world. And that's okay. You know, I don't know how that affects art. Maybe that's doing my art some well. You know, I made a play here that was quite good, and so maybe I needed to come back here.
Did you only perform the play in the Tom Thumb Theatre?
Yeah, I mean that's it. It's done. It won't be performed again. That's it. So
really?
I'll just move on to something else. I mean, maybe it will. I mean, maybe we'll come back in a different incarnation as something else. Maybe I like the idea of it being a film. We're working on. I'm going back to Bangkok in November to film another video with my production company over there, who I know very well, and we're looking to getting funding to make it into a short film. Be very different to the stage play, but it would be that similar story, but in a more sort of fantastical kind of screen mythical way. But it might be nothing, and I might next year I might rewrite something else.
Right.
It's very impermanent. I like the impermanence of things.
That's something I'm very interested in, and I don't know how to engage with it particularly, but I suppose it comes back to Walter Benjamin's idea of art in the age of mechanical reproduction.
Yeah.
Something that's created has its own aura, has its own energy, I suppose.
Yeah.
But that idea of creating something and just leaving it, actually, it goes back to, I've heard a little bit about the mandalas. It's what the Buddhist monks do, or is it the Jainist monks, where they create the patterns in sand.
Yeah.
And they spend days and days and days creating these colourful, beautiful patterns, and then when they're finished with it, they basically sweep it away.
Yeah.
And it's kind of the thing itself is almost irrelevant. It's the creating of it, and it's the process of it.
Yes.
It's fascinating, but even more fascinating the fact that when it's over, it's over.
Yeah.
And we're on to the next thing.
Yes. I'm totally engaged with that. I mean, one of the most inspirational philosophical perspectives for me is very radical. Lots of people hate them. Lots of people associate them with the alt-right or neo-fascism, that kind of thing, but it's not really about that. It's things like Graham Harman's Object Orientated Ontology. Then there's Hyper-Objects by Timothy Morton. And basically the way they see, I mean, they completely reevaluate the way that we view our relationship to the universe around us. And it is this sense of impermanence. They see us as just one object in a universe full of other objects, and we're all in a state of deterioration. And it's fascinating philosophy, wonderful. It takes kind of the realism of kind of nihilism, existential nihilism, which I suppose science has brought us to, which is we are all alone. There is no kind of, there's a lot of weight behind that, and obviously a lot of scientific proof behind it, those kind of things. But it also gives it a layer of, it's not quite so hopeless. There's hope, because it just means, well, this is just the way it is. So, if you think of the universe like a body, then your body is made up of living and non-living things. You have living cells, but you also have inanimate molecules, bits, stuff that makes you. And maybe the universe needs us as these little tiny little microbe people on a little blue rock to do some sort of function, and it also needs the big stones that are going through the universe, and we're all just part of this big universal body. Do you know what I mean? And I think it's a very, really healthy way of looking at the universe. Of course, it's very controversial, because all of a sudden you have all of the religions then just jump on that from a great height and go, this is disgusting, because obviously you're denying the fact that there is some universal creator. But then you're privileging the object as opposed to the human subject, which of course shatters many religious faiths. But the more I was reading it while being in Asia, the more I recognised that it was actually taking so many ideas from conventional Buddhism. So it's almost kind of like science has ended up where Buddhism began. And that's kind of another shocking thing for kind of conventional academia in the West to sort of acknowledge, because obviously, all these primitive religions coming in there with ideas that they're now kind of thinking, oh, right. And that's one of the most fascinating things for me, is the more we learn, the more we realise we don't know. And I think we realise we're, Buddhism talks about, you are the leaf and you are the flower. And of course, these ideas that, well, that's actually true, because the water that's in a leaf, if you eat it, it becomes the water in you. You are the leaf. Once you start to scientifically understand the way we are part of an ecosystem, suddenly that's Buddhism. And then you're suddenly thinking, oh God, all of this biology, and now we're realising that maybe 2,000 years ago they kind of had the right kind of idea anyway. So maybe this whole Western cultural project of no, it's all about us and the universe was created for us, was a complete fallacy. And that's really unsettling to a lot of people. Yeah. So they hate it, with a passion. So one of the really good books, I suppose, is Hyper Objects, and it's by Timothy Morton. And that's a beautiful book, and that kind of explains it. Again, you're going to find loads of people in academia who absolutely hate him for many different reasons. Many kind of really far-right people take on this object orientated ontology and then make it serve their agenda, but it's not written for them. Yeah. Graham Harman. Yeah, but they're very interesting texts. And I think you'll find, if you like the kind of the idea of Buddhism and those kind of things, you'll start to recognise a lot of Buddhist ways of looking at the world in there. Yeah. But in a very kind of rational, scientific, contemporary way. It's also well researched. He uses scientific research and stuff.
Thanks once again to Tomi Poppers. As I've said before, he is one of the many creative people that I met in the Margate Arts Club. In the next episode, Tomi moves on to speak further about art and its relation to power, with a brief reference to Michel Foucault. He talks about the book he wrote in Bangkok, subsequently banned, and he also speaks about his forthcoming projects and much, much more. Thanks very much, guys, and see you next time.